welcome to another session of the Rewiring Your Brain World Summit. My name is Michael Stone. I'm one of the co-producers of the summit and also the founder of Neurodynamic Institute and Neurodynamic Breathwork. And I'm your co-host for the session. And I'm very happy to be here today with Dr. Philippe Douyon. How are you, Dr. Douyon, and welcome.
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. So I'd like to introduce you to our audience by reading your bio, and then we'll jump right into the conversation. Sound okay?
Sounds good.
All right, awesome. Philippe Douyon, MD, is a compassionate and dynamic board-certified neurologist who has helped diagnose, treat, and improve the lives of countless patients. His personalized approach, dedication, and commitment to people has helped them overcome significant medical and personal challenges. His devotion to his patients has improved their health, wellness, and quality of life. His personal vision that we empower people by changing their perspectives about their own health and wellness by working with them in a loving and compassionate way has inspired patients and colleagues, allowing him to grow as a leader in the field of neurology. He completed residency in neurology at New York University and his fellowship in clinical neurophysiology at New York Presbyterian Cornell. Dr. Douyon has spent the last several years caring for people with neurological disorders. After spending years witnessing how neurological disorders often rob people of their life and personal power, and observing the delicate balancing act between medication side effects and symptom relief, he began to realize that he could do better for the people he serves. Therefore, he decided to create a therapeutic supportive environment aimed at using a multimodal approach to improve the lives of people with neurological disorders and promote the health of their brains. The Enley BrainFit Institute is Dr. Douyon's brainchild. It is a health, wellness, and technology company created to improve people's health and quality of life, and one of its primary focuses is creating individualized, disease-specific exercise regimens to help heal the underlying disease process and promote neuroplasticity. Another one of its objectives is to create technology that will promote healthy living and better the lives of people. And Dr. Douyon's BrainFit app, which was released in November 2018, is the first in a series of apps to help people in the pursuit of a healthy life. And with this company, he has embarked on a journey to empower people, better their health, and add value to their lives. And Dr. Douyon is also the author of the book Neuroplasticity, Your Brain's Superpower. Okay, so why don't we start out just with the question, what is neuroplasticity and how does it work?
Yeah, so we have learned more in the last 20 years about the brain than we did the previous 200 years. And we used to think that our brains were static, that the only times that our brains would actually change is if somebody developed had some kind of traumatic brain injury or developed some kind of neurodegenerative disease like a dementia. But we now know that our brains are constantly changing and can change in some really positive ways. We know that our brains are constantly evolving, that they're making new neurons and new connections. And that's what neuroplasticity really is. It's about our brain's ability to adapt, to learn, to heal, to make new neurons and new connections. And for me, what is really powerful about that, what's really powerful about our brain's ability to evolve is that, well, that means that we're meant to evolve. We're meant to evolve as individuals. We're meant to evolve as a community as well as a society.
Thank you for that. Can you talk a little bit about your personal history and your journey from neurologist to starting your own institute and how your own medical history impacted that journey?
Sure. So a lot of people know that I am a doctor. They know that I'm a neurologist, but what they don't realize is that I'm actually a patient. And so when I was 18 years old, a freshman in college, I was a college scholarship athlete, and I went for my first physical. So this was in my first week as a new student on campus, and I failed my physical. And the doctors at the time didn't understand why I failed, but they couldn't clear me to play in tournaments. So they said, well, look, why don't you come back in a few days and we'll retest you. So I came back a few days later and I failed the physical again. But this time they allowed me to compete because we had a big tennis tournament coming up. So we go to this town about 3 hours away to compete in this tennis tournament. And I am playing my second match of the day. And I go to serve. And as I go to serve, my entire body just goes into one large cramp and I collapse onto the floor. And I'm on that court, completely unable to move. And so when the director of the tournament realizes that I can no longer play, a couple of people come, they grab me by my hands and my feet, they carry me towards the back fence of the court, and that's where they lay me. And that's where I stay for the next hour, freezing cold, unable to move, with balls from different court hitting me as I lay there. About an hour later, they decided to call the ambulance, which took me to the hospital. And at the hospital, they rehydrate me. They do a lot of tests. I start to regain function. And there they realized that I had an issue with my kidneys. And so they told me that when I get back to New York, that I should follow up with a kidney specialist. And that was sort of the beginning of my journey with kidney disease. And so I went through college with kidney disease. I went through medical school in kidney disease. And about 8 days after I walked across the stage at Carnegie Hall to get my medical school diploma, I then walked into the operating room at New York Presbyterian Hospital and got a kidney transplant. And my father was my donor. And that was my first kidney transplant. I've since had a second one. But being a patient certainly impacted my medical career. Being a patient has made me a much better doctor. It's allowed me to connect with my patients on a completely different level because I know what it's like to face your mortality. I know what it's like to take medications that you may have side effects from. I know what it's like to be uncertain about your future. But I also know what it's like to overcome health challenges and the perspective that you need to have in order to do so. And certainly as a brain expert, I know what it takes to essentially take charge of your brain, become the leader that your brain needs in order to create the health and the life that that you may want for yourself.
Wow, that was quite a journey.
Yeah, it's really incredible journey. But my story has been really inspiring for a lot of people. And it also helped me to transition from the role of traditional doctor to somebody that's able to help a lot more people and in a lot of different ways. And so when I was practicing, I still practice medicine part of the time in the way that you think of doctors practicing medicine. But early on in my career, what I realized is that the biggest difference that I had in people's lives wasn't when I prescribed them a pill. It wasn't when I took them to the operating room. It was when I got them to think differently about what was possible for themselves, for their health, for their business, for the life that they wanted to create. And that's what the Inley BrainFit Institute is really about. It's about showing people what is truly possible for them, regardless of whatever diagnosis that they have, regardless of whatever label our health system has given them.
So how do thoughts and mindset influence neuroplasticity and health, and how can we be more conscious of and get more control over our thoughts to really move us forward and keep us just healthy as human beings?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I was talking to my sons the other day, and I said to them, the one thing that God, that our maker, that the universe has given us absolute control over are our thoughts. And thoughts are so incredibly powerful that people are fighting for control of our thoughts from the moment that we are alive. Initially, it's our parents. Then it may be our teachers and classmates. Then it is society at large. Then it becomes our employers and our colleagues. Right? Businesses spend trillions of dollars a year trying to control people's thoughts because they know that if they can control people's thoughts, then they can control the way that we act. They can control how we spend our money. They can control how we vote, right? And so being able to gain control of our thoughts is incredibly powerful. There's some studies out there that say that we have somewhere between 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts per day. And I have no idea how they count anybody's thoughts. But what's remarkable about that is that 90 to 95% of the thoughts we have today are the same exact thoughts that we had yesterday. And so then if that's the case, if people are thinking the same way every single day, right, then it's easy to understand why why it's so difficult for people to change their lives. And then out of those 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts that we're having every single day, some studies say that 60 to 70% of those thoughts are negative. And then so it becomes easy to understand why not only is it tough for people to change their lives, but we can see why it is that people have lives that they're not happy about if 60 to 70% of their thoughts are negative. When we have new thoughts, new ideas, new beliefs, within our brains, we're creating new neurons. Right? And the more we think something, now we're strengthening connections between neurons that are associated with those thoughts. And so it's really important for us to broaden our thinking if we want to keep our brains healthy. One of the things that I say to people is, you have to surround yourself with people who think differently than you do. It doesn't mean that you have to adopt their ideas and their beliefs, but surrounding yourselves with people who think differently allows your brain to make new neurons and new connections, which will be healthy for you. It may be uncomfortable for you, but it'll be healthy from a brain perspective. But oftentimes what we see is that people surround themselves with others who think exactly like them, who reaffirm the same ideas and beliefs that they already have. And so that doesn't allow their brain to learn, doesn't allow them to make new neurons and new connections. So new thoughts are incredibly powerful.
So not only our thoughts, but actually what we have around us, like our friends and what their thinking patterns are, and probably even what we input into our brain from things like television and stuff, have a major impact on our neuroplasticity and on the neurons we develop. Is that correct?
Absolutely. You know, when it comes to the people that we are surrounded by, we've got a group of neurons called mirror neurons, right? And so what mirror neurons do is that they essentially allow you to mimic the actions of the people that you spend the most time with. So that way, if I scratch my nose, it makes it more likely that you're going to scratch your nose. And it's thought that that elicits empathy within us. But what we're now realizing is that your brain, the neurons in your brain start to fire at the same frequency as the people that you spend the most time with. Right? And so you start to think like the people that you spend the most time with. You start to act like the people that you spend the most time with. That's why they say things like, if you are around 5 millionaires, you're going to be the sixth. Or growing up, we always heard, you know, if you're around some kids that are not acting right, well, you're going to get in trouble too. We start to become the people that we are around because our brains start to behave in ways similar to the people that we spend the most time with.
Well, thank you. I know you say that many of our health challenges, mental health challenges, can be neural circuitry issues. So how can understanding, like for instance, depressive disorders or anxiety disorders or substance abuse disorders can be neural circuitry issues, actually help people to change their behaviors and thinking patterns so they can create changes in their brains and live happier lives?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I'm somebody who has believed that the more we learn about the brain, the more neurology, psychiatry, and psychology will come together, because it's all the same organ. We just look at it from different perspectives. And so certainly, I see people all the time who, if they've had a stroke or they've had some kind of injury to their brain, well, they also develop depression or anxiety, right? Because the brain is impacted. Right? And I'll give you a little story about a little personal story for me. When so I told you I've had 2 kidney transplants. So I did very well for about 14 years with my initial transplant, which I had when I was 28 years old. And then the initial disease process started to come back. So I was starting to mentally and physically prepare to have a second transplant, but then COVID hit. And so when COVID hit, everything essentially shut down. And I knew that if I were to get that virus, that I may not do well. And so as somebody who's immunocompromised, I probably would not do well. And so I did a hard quarantine for about a year. And then I ended up with COVID, and I ended up in the hospital for 2 weeks. And one of the things that they told me in the hospital was, well, the virus has completely taken out the rest of your kidney function, and now you need to go on dialysis. Up until that time, dialysis had been my biggest fear, because everybody I had seen in the hospital doing dialysis looked like they were waiting for death, and they looked like they had accepted that death was right around the corner. And so when they told me that I needed to do dialysis, I processed that information. I cried. I was very anxious. I was depressed. But I had a decision that I needed to make. And the decision was I going to do dialysis the way that I had seen other people do it in the hospital, or was I going to do it my way? And so I decided that I was going to do dialysis very differently. And so when I did dialysis, I traveled on dialysis. I was making sure that I was exercising on dialysis. I certainly rested, because dialysis is very hard on the body. It's hard physically, mentally, emotionally, neurologically. I had a local news agency that was following me around, right? I took meetings while I was getting dialysis done. So in the dialysis centers, I used that time for professional and personal growth. And that really helped push me out of the anxiety and depression that I was feeling. Right? And because of that, I ended up doing well on dialysis. I was blessed. I had a second kidney transplant. My first one was from my father. The second one was from my cousin-in-law, Scott, somebody who is not even blood related to me. But certainly when we are going through challenges, the perspectives that we have, the way that we think about those challenges and what's possible for us impacts our level of anxiety and depression. And when we think of something like anxiety, anxiety is very natural. We all experience moments of anxiety, right? We may experience moments of anxiety before giving a talk. We may experience moments of anxiety before getting on an airplane. It's a very natural feeling. But what happens with people who have an anxiety disorder, one, it really sort of overtakes them. And there may not be an immediate potential threat, right? So there may not be the challenge of giving a talk, or there may not be, getting on an airplane. It just sort of overtakes them when there's nothing that seems to be related to the anxiety. And in people that I've worked with who have anxiety, it's about teaching them that what they're feeling is a very natural sort of phenomenon, right? So I always say that anxiety starts in the brain and has physical manifestations in the body. And so when you're feeling anxious, you may feel your heart racing, right? Your breath sort of quickens, your muscles tighten. Well, those are the same things that happen if we're exercising, right? And so it's teaching people that those physical manifestations are not always a sign of some impending doom or some danger, right? That it's a very natural phenomenon, and teaching them to think differently about the things that are making them feel anxious.
That last part of what you said, it kind of just brought to my mind the fact that, like, when I was a kid, I used to go to amusement parks a lot, and I go on roller coasters, and I would have my heart pounding, and I feel excited. But many times the person next to me, the same thing would be happening in their body, but they felt fear, afraid. So they were just kind of changing the meaning of what was happening in their body, and which totally shifted their experience of the ride, so to speak.
Absolutely. Look, I'll go to amusement parks, especially with my kids, and my kids are 12 and 10, so they're not going on the huge roller coasters, right? But I'm happy they're not going on the huge roller coasters, because there's some roller coasters you look up and you're like, that looks like it's as high as the sun. I am not going on that. that would make my heart race to a point where I'm like, yeah, that's not going to feel good for me.
With your story that you just told about dialysis, to me is very inspiring, because you never felt like you were a victim of the dialysis. It was like it was happening to you, and you were kind of working with it in a way that actually, in some ways, even may have moved you forward in your life, where you now have this inspiring story for other people, where how you move through these things that many times people, when you allow yourself to feel a victim of it, and create that mindset, it can really hold you back in your life and not allow you to really work through things in an effective way.
Yeah. Well, I think so. People have asked me, well, how did you go through medical school and college and kidney failure, and even when you are practicing attending? And a couple of different things. First, that there was always a bigger picture for me to focus on. Right. So in college, it was like, well, I got to get through college. This kidney disease thing is more of a pain in the butt. Right. Then in medical school, it's like, well, I want to be a doctor. This kidney disease thing is more of a pain in the butt than anything else. But, but we sort of had planned it that I could have a transplant essentially immediately after graduating medical school. But there was always a bigger picture. There was always a purpose that I had outside of the kidney disease. The other thing is that I took the focus off of myself. So even when I was on dialysis, I still saw patients. Right? There were people that I was taking care of who were worse off than I was, who were sicker than I was, or who needed my experience and my expertise to help them get through a tough time. Right? There were podcasts that I was a guest on, or my own podcast that I was shooting. So there was always something for me to take the focus off myself. So that way I wasn't always in my own head, like, oh, why is this happening to me? Or why do I have to go through this? And I think that that's really important. I'm a big believer in that this life that we live, it's not for us. We live this life to make the lives of others better. We live this life in order to make the world better. And when we're going through our own challenges, I think it's important to find the time to take the focus off of ourselves. A lot of the tests that we do face, we can take those tests and turn them into a testimony, and therefore help others with our own experiences.
So for you, having this bigger purpose really supported you in looking at your, dialysis in a different way, but also it sounds like it allowed you to, when we change habits, it's not easy, like in terms of thought patterns and stuff like that. But it sounds like having this bigger purpose allowed you to be more like stay with it and really go through what you needed to go through in order to kind of get to the other side, so to speak.
Absolutely. And I am very mindful about what I feed my brain, right? So to your point earlier about what we watch on TV, or what I'm listening to, or the kind of music I'm listening to, or the kind of books that I'm reading, all of that is with a purpose, right? And so I don't want things or people around that are going to be negative. And so even when I was going through my own health challenge, the people I specifically chose the people that I had around me. Mm-hmm. So I'll have people ask me like, oh, did you spend a lot of time with other people who had kidney disease? Like, absolutely not. Like, no, like a lot of times if you get a group of patients together, all they're talking about is their disease process and how difficult that is. I did not want to be part of that. And so I chose to have people around me that acknowledged that I was going through a tough time, but also saw what I was capable of, also saw the positives in my life, also saw how strong I was, were supportive of my overall purpose and mission and vision in this life. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really important, right? Because a lot of times we surround ourselves with people who will enable the negativity, enable the negative thinking, and I'm someone where if I'm in a group and all of a sudden there's a lot of negativity, it's going to be time for me to go, right? I'm somebody who actually, I don't even listen to the news anymore because I know the impact that that has on our brains, the impact that that has on our thoughts, and how that influences our actions.
Mm. You spoke earlier a little bit about exercise, and I know there's a whole chapter in your book that talks about it. Can you talk a bit about how exercise promotes neuroplasticity and how important it is?
Yeah. So exercise is the biggest promoter of neuroplasticity. And I'm somebody who always says that exercise has to be a mainstay of every treatment regimen there is, certainly for every neurological disorder and disease, as well as any physical and mental health issues. The reality is, I know a lot of doctors who have anxiety and depression, and very few of them take pills for it. I know doctors who the way that they treat their anxiety and depression is purely with exercise because it is the best thing that you can do for your overall mood. They just make sure that they get their exercise in every single day. I know a doctor who plays tennis every day. And even here in New York during the winter, we'll go outside. Right? If there's ice on the tennis courts, we'll find a dry patch where he can just hit up against the wall. And that is how he manages his anxiety and depression. So when it comes to exercise, exercise causes the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is the chemical that is most associated with neuroplasticity. So when we exercise, we get the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Increased levels of that cause our brains to make new neurons and new connections. So I did a scuba diving course once. I'm not sure if I'll ever do that again because when I was in the water, I realized, oh my gosh, there are things in here bigger than me that swim a whole lot faster than I do. But it's a beautiful experience. But if you ever go scuba diving, you may see a sea squirt. A sea squirt is this little invertebrate that's attached maybe to the bottom of the sea or to some coral. A sea squirt has this incredible neurological journey that mimics our own neurological journey. So when a sea squirt is first born, it's this fully mobile tadpole, right? So it's got a tail, it's got a brain, it's got a spinal cord, and it's just swimming around. Its entire purpose, the first 12 to 72 hours of its life, is to find a place where it can park itself, and then it will never have to move again. In that place, it will eat and it will reproduce. But the most incredible thing happens once this sea squirt starts to park itself. Its body begins to release chemicals that then digest its brain and spinal cord. And over time, all that's left is this little rudimentary cell. Right? So it completely, once it becomes sedentary, it completely loses its nervous system. Well, we see the same thing happen with people. When people are sedentary, their brains begin to atrophy. And so movement and exercise is incredibly important for brain health. Our brains and bodies are designed for us to move. And so to exercise is the most powerful thing that you can do for your brain.
Is there any specific type of exercise that's better than other types? Like, do you have to do a lot of movement or just walking, or does it really matter as long as you just move your body?
Well, so certainly aerobic exercise is going to be the best for your brain. You know, I think combining aerobic with some resistance training is really good. But there are studies that show that if you're somebody who has started to have some mild cognitive impairment, that even just walking 30, 45 minutes, 3 to 5 times a week is going to help with that. Okay? People that I see, let's say who are fairly young, and if I'm asking them about exercise, if they tell me, oh, I walk, I'm like, all you're telling me is that your legs are working. So if you're fairly young, it needs to be more intense than that. But even when we look at studies that look at school-age children, the studies show that you're more likely to do better on a test if you go for a run an hour before you take the test, as opposed to if you cram up until the very last minute. You're more likely to retain the information a whole lot better. So exercise is better for our brains from a structural perspective, from a cognitive perspective, from a learning perspective. So exercise is really powerful.
Also, I've heard you say that being a creature of habit is literally killing your brain. And I know that for me, there are times like, for instance, I'll be driving a car and like, since it is kind of this automatic thing, I'll be off who knows where. And then the next thing I notice, I'm 2 blocks further ahead.
Yeah.
And I have no idea how I got from here to there. And I think for most people, like most of your life is an automatic.
Yeah.
It's kind of like things that you've done for days or years in certain ways where you don't even have to think about it anymore. Right. So I know that can't be good for neuroplasticity, but can you kind of dive more into that a little bit?
Yeah, I tell people all the time, look, being a creature of habit is killing your neurological potential. Like one of the things that your brain wants is that your brain wants to be as efficient as possible. Right? It consumes so much energy that it's like it just wants to do things very easily. And that's where we feel really comfortable. But in order for us to really achieve whatever goals that we need to achieve, we do have to take some risk in life, which will be very uncomfortable for our brains. In order for us to learn new things, that's going to be really uncomfortable for our brains. So I'm not somebody whoever grew up playing an instrument or reading music. And a few years ago, I decided I wanted to go take a piano class. And so I go to take the piano class, and I'm sitting there with the instructor. They've got the music book out. I'm trying to read the music book. I'm trying to coordinate my right and left hands, which, it's every single thing is new for me. And I'm like, oh my God, my brain hurts, right? And as a neurologist, I'm like, first of all, I know that the brain has no pain receptors. That's why we can operate on people's brains when they're awake. So clearly this is not pain. What is it that I'm feeling? And it dawned on me that because all of this was new, what I was really feeling was my brain making new neurons and new connections. How often is it that I do something completely brand new? It wasn't very often at all. And so newness is what allows our brains to stay young and healthy. It's really what's going to challenge our brains because it allows our brains to make new neurons and new connections, and then attach those neurons and connections to maybe patterns that are already in our brains. And so that way we can start making different associations. But trying new things is incredibly important.
One of the things that people worry about the most as they get older is losing their memory.
Yep. I
mean, it's just devastating if you've worked with people that, it's like they're not even the same person anymore. Can what you're just talking about, like having new experiences and learning new skills, can it help people with memory issues?
Yeah. So one of the thing that people are most afraid of when they see me is potentially being diagnosed with dementia, particularly Alzheimer's dementia. And what people don't realize is that a lot of dementias, including Alzheimer's dementias, they're a lifestyle disease, right? So if you spend 30, 40 years of your life sedentary and your brain is just sort of atrophying over that period of time, well, that's going to significantly increase your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. If you're somebody who lived a sedentary life, didn't eat healthy, and are now overweight, well, we know if we look at the last 30 years, the 3 diseases that have really increased significantly are obesity, diabetes, and Alzheimer's disease, right? There's a link there. In fact, a lot of neuroscientists and neurologists will tell you that Alzheimer's disease is really type 3 diabetes, right? It's a lifestyle disease. And so there are things that we can do every single day to help minimize our risk of developing dementia down the line. And that includes even making sure that we're getting enough sleep. We know that getting into the deeper stages of sleep. So we should all be getting somewhere between 6 to 8 hours of sleep per night, because getting into the deeper stages of sleep, that's when your brain is clearing out the toxins that have built up throughout the day. Right? We know that the way that we eat has a significant impact on our brain health. In fact, our brain and our gut are connected. They're connected from an embryologic perspective. They're connected from a neurochemical perspective in terms of a chemical like serotonin, which 90 to 95% of is made in the gut, but it has a huge impact on our mood. And our brain and gut are connected structurally through the vagus nerve, which goes from the brainstem down into the chest, impacts your lungs, your hearts, and into your gut. So the decisions that we make every single day that impacts our lifestyles, exercise, eating right, getting enough sleep, minimizing stress, all of that plays a significant role in whether or not we develop a dementia down the line.
One of the very popular things that's happening now, even in the workplace, is mindfulness. Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of research on it in terms of how it can actually create changes in the brain. Have you looked at how mindfulness practices can support neuroplasticity?
Absolutely. Actually, I've done a lot of work with specifically contemplative practices. I was doing some work with a reverend in local community here on the impact it has on the brain. And so for me, when I think about mindfulness, it's really about being present in the moment and to try to do so without any judgment. And I see people all the time who are anxious about things that may or may not happen in the future and are depressed about things that happened in the past that they cannot change. Both conditions mean that they are not fully present in the moment. And different practices actually allow you to be present in the moment. Meditation is one of them. Music can be another. Writing can be another. And here why mindfulness is so important. That people who engage in mindfulness practices like a meditation, if they just do it 15 to 20 minutes a day, we see really positive structural changes in the brain. So we can see that there are parts of their brains that have neurons that'll be thicker than the brains of people who don't engage in meditation. Right? So then you can ask yourself, well, why would that be? The reality is that if we're constantly stressed out, right, we're all built for short-term stress, right? If a lion walks into the room that you're in, that's short-term stress, right? But when we think about the lives that most of us live today, it's chronic stress. And what chronic stress does is that it kills neurons, especially in the parts of the brain that are responsible for making memory. And so there are a lot of people that I'll see that come in with memory issues, but the reality is that their memory issues are because they have undergone some significant stressor that they're just reliving, right? They're just under chronic stress. And different mindfulness practices allow you to alleviate that stress, whether it's meditation, listening to music, writing, prayer, whatever it's going to be for that person. So mindfulness is really important for the brain.
So from the things that you've said during this talk, if you were just basically going to give people overall like some pointers on how to have a healthy brain, how to keep your memory as long as possible. We've talked about exercise. We've talked about, watching who your circle of friends are, about what input you have in the brain, about mindfulness, about sleeping well, about eating well. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about or that we haven't spoken about that you would add to that?
Yeah, one thing I always say is that your brain is always looking to prove you right. So what are the thoughts that you're actually focused on? If you tell yourself, I am a very good person, right? Your brain will look for all the proof that makes that true. It'll look to the experiences that you've had in the past where you've helped somebody, right? Where you've been impactful in the lives of others. And it'll say, you're right, you are a very good person. But if you tell yourself something negative, your brain will look to prove that right also. And so you have to be very mindful about the messages that you are telling yourself, because your brain will take those messages and create your life based on that.
Wonderful. So you would definitely add self-talk to all the things that people should watch.
Absolutely. I mean, I self-talk every day. I've got my affirmations that I say over and over, especially when we think about that we've got to combat a lot of the negative messages that we're getting from society as a whole. Right. And so that self-talk allows you to build a layer of defense against that.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of this stuff is unconscious. I don't think most people really even think about their self-talk. It's just kind of going on in the background, and it's so important and affects them so heavily in terms of their health and neuroplasticity. What would you say is the best way to kind of take these things that are happening unconsciously and to stay present and really pay attention to these things that really make such a big difference in our lives?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think a lot of this is really unconscious for people. And when we think about just sort of our evolution from childhood to adulthood, right, and we think about children, up until about the age of 7, if we look at the brain frequencies of children, they're incredibly slow. It's essentially the same frequency as an adult that's drowsy or maybe even sleeping, right? It's the same frequency as somebody who is undergoing hypnosis, the brains of children. And so basically, children are sort of like this empty slate that they're just taking in everything that's being said. They're not even consciously thinking about anything. And so frequencies change after about the age of 8, and they get faster, certainly as we get older to a certain point. And so I think in order for us to really get good at figuring out what some of these unconscious thoughts that we're having, first we need to be very mindful of what it is that we're allowing in. Children are not able to think about what they're allowing in. They're just taking things in, right? But as adults, we've got the power to say, okay, what am I taking in? Let me think about this. Is this something that is really working for me? And then it is about giving yourself the messages over and over and over that allow you to create the life that you want. Repetition is key. Actually, repetition is what makes something true, right? So even if we look at our politicians, right, our politicians will repeat the same things over and over and over again. The first time you hear it, you might be like, that is absolute baloney. That is not true. But after the 1000th time, your brain is kind of like, well, we've heard it 1,000 times. It must be true, right? Like they have strengthened the connection of that one idea in your brain to the point that it becomes true. And so I think being very mindful of the messages that you're taking in, the messages that you're telling yourself is really important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Douyon, for everything that you've shared with us. How can people find out more about your work?
So they can go to my website, which is the InleyBrainFitInstitute.com, InleyBrainFit Institute.com. They can certainly find me on social media, on Instagram, LinkedIn, even Facebook. So, yeah.
Okay, awesome. And again, thank you so much for this. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for having me.